Here I'm going to give you a little introduction to Excel. For those of you who've used Excel before, this will probably be a review. When you first open Excel, and here I'm using Excel 2010, if you're using a slightly older or newer version, you're going to have a somewhat different screen, but it should be basically the same and all the basic functions will work. It's going to look like a matrix like this. Each of these is called a cell, and you have rows that are numbered and columns that have letters. And so each cell in the data matrix has an address that's comprised of a letter and a number, and you can see that address in the upper left hand corner here. So this cell here, whichever one you're highlighting, is going to show the address D7, F8, H11, etc. Now Excel has really made the calculator obsolete because Excel will do all your calculations and you can show all your work and see if you've made a mistake, and if you had made a little mistake or even a big one, you can make the changes and Excel will go back through the calculations. So that's really useful. If I enter a bunch of, say, bills, then I can easily sum up all of these things. I can go back to the home menu, and if I click onto the cell under all these numbers, go up here to Autosum. Excel is pretty smart. It highlights all the numbers and enters this formula underneath them, which is a sum function. You just press enter, and there it's just summed your numbers for you. The Autosum feature automatically created what's called a function, and functions and formulas can be accessed directly by just putting an equal sign in any of the boxes. So if I press equals here, automatically it takes me to the functions and formulas, and I can enter a function or formula. That can be as simple as just highlighting a number like that. It gives you the address, press enter, and then there's that number repeated. Or that's not so useful, but you can enter whatever function you want. In this case, functions are these one-word things like sum. There's a bunch of them. If you click on the function button here with the FX, you can see there's lots of them. Went to all functions. There's just dozens of them, most of which we're not going to use. If we start with the equal sign, enter the name of the function, and then whatever the function works on, we put in parentheses. So open parenthesis, and then it's expecting us to highlight numbers. In this case, I can highlight all these numbers like that, and then press enter. Excel puts that last parentheses, the close parenthesis, and so what we're doing is summing the numbers D3 through D9. That little colon means through, or to. And it's the same thing that the Autosum function did, but you want to get the hang of using this because we're going to do that, use other functions as well. Let's say instead of sum, I could enter here equals average, and then open parenthesis, just highlight the numbers I want to average, press enter, and there's the average number like that. Now let's say I was wrong about one of these numbers. This is not 30, it's actually 300. If I enter 300, it automatically changes the numbers. See, you already changed the sum and the average. Or I can go back to 30, it changes it back. So that's the great thing about Excel, especially if you have to do some expense or other calculations every year, and they're basically the same every year except the numbers. The basic formula is the same, but the numbers change. You can have just the same basic worksheet, just change the numbers a little bit, and Excel will do the rest. Again, Excel is mainly for saving a lot of time when doing calculations. The other thing is these formats of the numbers can change. So let's say these are all dollar figures. So if I highlight all of them and click on the dollar sign, and puts them in a currency kind of format, I can increase or decrease the decimal places by using these little buttons here. More and more decimals or fewer and fewer. If I reduce the decimals entirely, you'll notice that it rounds up. Rounded up 22.5 to 22.50 to $23. That doesn't mean that the 22.50 goes away, because if you see, the real number is up here, right next to the FX. But what it does change is the way the number is displayed. And that's true in general. If you, for example, were to come up here, highlight in between D and E, and make this really small so you can't see it, now the numbers are hidden and replaced with this hash mark. That doesn't mean the numbers are gone. They're just hiding. If I would go back, change that, they come back. So formatting doesn't actually change what's in the cells. It only changes how they're presented. And if you you can easily make a column or a row too small to see, and it'll do that. But as soon as you change it, it'll go back and you can see all the numbers again. This gets to the point of, these cells start out as a certain size, but if you want them bigger, smaller, you can always change them, as I've done here by basically clicking in between the two columns. You can do the same thing with the rows. If you line up your cursor in between 2 and 3, and then drag 2 down, you can make 2 much bigger. Say you wanted to make all the rows much bigger. I can just highlight all these rows here. Then I can change the size of just one of them, and it'll change the size of all of them similarly. Go back, and it'll change the size of all of them to go back. Same thing with the columns. If I highlight all the columns, or a bunch of columns that I want to make smaller, I can make just one of them smaller and they all get smaller. One of them bigger and they all get bigger, as long as the one they're highlighted like that. The other thing to notice is this is just one worksheet of the workbook that's now called Book 2. You'll notice if you look at the bottom left-hand corner that we have Sheet 2 and Sheet 3. Sheet 2 and Sheet 3 are blank worksheets. We can have even more by clicking on this little this orange sun thing. Lots of worksheets like that. Or you can have fewer by deleting them. You can right-click on it, delete, or right-click, Shift-D, right-click, delete, like that. In many of the assignments we're going to do, you're going to have some data in one sheet, maybe a chart in the second, and some interpretations in the third. So these can be renamed. I can highlight this, rename this, call it data. Highlight this, rename it, call it chart. And highlight this and rename it and call it interpretation, or we'll call it text. And you can see, we'll see in the future how easy it is to make a chart in Excel. Easy as just highlighting a group of numbers and going up to one of the menus and insert. If I wanted to insert a column chart like that, and it's right there. Very simple. We're going to get to this in the future, but needless to say, it's very simple to make charts in Excel. The other thing is when you're writing in Excel, say if I'm writing something like this in this cell, it looks like it's bleeding over to the next bunch of cells, but actually all the text is stored in the very first cell. It just looks like it's bleeding over. I can see that by clicking on this cell C4, and I can see all the text. If I click on D4, there's nothing there. Okay, and that's again the difference between presentation where the text looks and where it actually exists. It exists in this cell. You can write pretty much up to a page or so of information in any given cell. So when you're writing stuff in answer to some of the questions on the assignment, before you show me, you can write most of your answer to one question in any one cell until it gets to the point where you can't see it on the screen. Then you might want to go down. But basically, Excel's gotten to the point where it'll accept an enormous amount of stuff within any given cell. When you save your file, it'll save with a suffix on the end of, I'm going to say this as 0.01, place the file that was there. Generally you want to save the file with the number of the assignment, and then put it on the desktop, and it'll be saved with the suffix xlsx, which indicates it's an Excel version. If you have an older version of Excel at home, it might have just XLS. That's a pretty old version of Excel that won't have a lot of the newer features of the one we're going to use. And then finally, when you're ready to save the file to, you should show it to me when you're finished. Rather, you should show the file to me and then save it on SkyDrive. It's easy to upload Excel and other Microsoft Office documents to SkyDrive.